Hello and welcome to the 10th episode of the 8 Cube Circus. I am Smlz and I have two amazing co-hosts today. Joining us for the ninth time is Denish, who is the notorious Hella player, Agatha merchant
I'm
now.
doing great. I just hit
Denish, how we
the
doing today?
season pass XP limit for the first time ever because of the hot location. I got so much season pass XP that Marvel Snap told me to stop playing. I've never had that happen. But yeah, other than that, doing well. I'm doing really well on ladder. Agatha's a lot of fun. Everything's fun. I'm excited for Golden Gauntlet and I'm excited for this episode.
And now joining us for the first time, our special guest today, content creator, in quotes, frequent streamer, and Golden Gauntlet 2 champion, one of the best players in the world, Roramplays. How are we
It's
doing today?
going good. You know me, just Airshim one tricking it here on ladder and in conquest all the time. So it's the best life ever.
All right. So today we've got a action-packed episode for you all. This is coming out when Golden Gauntlet qualifier signups are out, so make sure to stay tuned to the end of the episode to hear our best Golden Gauntlet tips if you want to qualify. But to open the episode, we just had one of the most meta-shaking OTAs in Marvel Snap history. This kind of hit everything everybody was asking for. It hit Fenris Wolf, Mercury Cannonball, which was the number one thing on the hit list for a lot of players. It also hit the boogeyman of High Infinite in Juggernaut, and we also got some pretty impactful buffs. So I'm going to start with Denish. What do you think is the most impactful change in this OTA? And what do you think of the
I,
OTA
I
as a
I'm
whole?
not the biggest fan of this OTA to be honest, but I liked three changes that they made. I think the rest is kind of unimpactful. I love the Fenris, the Cannonball, and the Juggernaut. I'd love to start with Juggernaut. I think Juggernaut for the longest time was like mid-range player's best friend. We can get into what mid-range means if we really want, because I know that's one of our specialties. But what it would allow people to do is basically have one win condition and then one Juggernaut. And then Juggernaut would just clear an entire lane, but now it's a little bit harder because you're not able to play cheap, or you're able to play cheap. You're not able to play slightly more expensive cards with your Juggernaut, so you can't do a Search, Shang, and a Jug anymore. And you actually have to spend your Surge boost on your Juggernaut in order to combo it with strong pieces like Surfer or I don't know what people are running, Brood. These point cards that are very large or very impactful. I love the jug change. I want to know what you guys think. What are decks gonna run instead? Maybe Surfer.
I definitely think we'll see more sort of synergy based list. Jug was sort of one of the uniform cards in these sort of mid range lists, which I'm going to define as basically playing at most one card that costs like five or more and just a bunch of generically good ones through fours. I think Juggernaut is sort of definitely like the poster child of that. Like so many people were just playing like the craziest like bad decks, funky decks that shouldn't work, and then they just included Jug, and all of a sudden they had like a 60% win rate with it. It was a problem for how few of a deck building cost it had for such a massive payoff. If Jug was like, okay, you have to play this one drop and this two drop, and then you get 3/3 Jug, then it's like, okay, you have an actual deck building cost to be able to play this card. It was just, I'm putting this in my deck. I win one lane. I just have to win another lane, pretty much, assuming you have like competent planning with that.
Yeah, you just basically described my last like 6 seasons right there of playing Marvel Snap. Just Devil Dino, Ronin, throw a big 5 or 6 cost card, and then play Juggernaut to be able to win the lanes. Um, for the OTA though, I actually am excited about two of the buffs, and then I'm excited about two of the nerfs. The nerfs I'm most excited about are Fenris Wolf and Cannonball, being able to kind of lower that free points ceiling that we've been enduring for the last couple months. And the couple buffs that I'm excited for are actually Ghost Spider and America Chavez. I think Ghost Spider's point to 1-3 is actually a very significant buff for Move, because Move already can move their power as they need to, and a 1-3 Ghost Spider is just a free play most of the time.
Absolutely. I 100% agree that 1-3 Ghost Trader is kind of ridiculous. If you think about it, we started off at 1-2, and now, like, I don't think Ghost Spider has almost any downside. And so you can see the power creep a little, and I'm kind of into it. I think it's perfectly fine that Ghost Spider is a 1-3. Obviously, it's really helpful for move, but another thing I love it in is Red Wing. A really fun thing you can do in Red Wing or like Husky Puppy style decks is you can play an Infinite and then you can tug the Infinite. But that basically says, okay, I have 20 power. You don't know which lane it's going to be in because I can just move it with a one cost on the final turn. And that's a ramp style deck that puts the Infinite down a turn early, obviously. And yeah, Fenris, and obviously I'm excited for the Fenris nerfs. I'm always happy to see less Fenris. I think having it be at 3 cost, I'll touch on Hela a little bit specifically regarding Fenris because it's like the big counter. It being at a 3 cost is actually kind of interesting because it makes it out of your gambit range. When they play Fenris on curve, you basically had a 50-50 every single game to gambit it. But now, if they float the first 2 turns and then play Fenris, which isn't going to happen very often, but it might, the 50-50 is who has prio. And if you lose that 50-50, you don't even get a discard on your gambit. So it's very interesting. I'm curious to see if Fenris is going to feel better or worse into the Hela matchup, especially now it doesn't die to Death Strike.
Yeah, I think that this is definitely the Fenris change is actually a buff to CGR. I think because before Lady Deathstrike was doing a lot of the same things as Cosmic Ghost Rider here, but now Cosmic Ghost Rider has one massive piece of interaction there. I mean, when you're running Cosmic Ghost Rider, you are looking for those hits in the front row, and Fenris is 95% of the time in the front row. So I think that it's definitely, while it's a nerf to Fenris, it's also a buff to Cosmic Ghost Rider because Deathstrike can no longer reliably deal with that. So it may not necessarily be the best thing to be a Lady Deathstrike anymore. And Cosmic Ghost Rider is taking another point to maybe outclassing Lady Deathstrike as the premier 5/7 tech card. One change I really want to talk about is Silver Surfer First Steps going from a 3/4 to a 3/5. I thought this card was interesting and underexplored at a 3/4. I don't think it was very good, but at 3/5, I think that this card is legit. When you're looking at the stat lines at 3 cost, you have the two outliers in Luna and Gladiator, but the a lot of the sort of cards that have some stats, but you're mainly playing them for an effect at 3 cost, but still have like some stats and not like Sage, which starts at a 3/0, are 3/4s and 3/5s. And the 3/5s are a lot better than the 3/4s for the most part because I feels like 5 is that breaking point. Like even with the 1 drops, Sable going from a 1/5 effectively to a 1/4 was devastating for the card. Bob going from a 1/5 to a 1/4 saw a lot of cut in the play of that card. I think 5 power is a quite big breakpoint in this game, and I think Silver Surfer First Steps going above the breakpoint is very good. It's also a card that you want to be playing with priority. This is now probably, in my estimation, the best Iron Patriot follow up in the game, better than Gladiator, because Gladiator could always sell, but normally you're securing that lane. You are most of the time securing the lane with IP into Surfer First Steps, and you get another card from a lane you are already winning and your opponent may have abandoned. So you could effectively get 2 Iron Patriot cards. I think this card is very strong. I think you're going to start to see a lot more of it. Not immediately, but as this metagame progresses, I think you're going to see a lot of Silver Surfer First Steps. Also, I also really like the Chavez buff. I think going to +3 makes this a premier one drop. It is now a 1/5 stats there effectively. If assuming you're not bouncing it or hitting it on a buff card, I think Chavez is definitely becoming one of the premier one drops in the game with this buff, and I'm happy to see it for a card that's been sort of tossed by the wayside ever since the
Yeah,
initial rework.
absolutely. To touch on Chavez a little bit, I've already seen Doc Guapo, which is one of the high infinite bounce players, messing around with it. If you think about it, Silver Sable's really good, and it's playing as a 1/4 because you get +2 and then -2 to the opponent's cards. Chavez is a 1/2, so there's your +2, but she's giving +3 to your own cards, so she's playing for 5, +3 on bounce. So she's just already pretty much. She feels better than Silver Sable, and Silver Sable felt uncuttable in bounce. And so I definitely think that it's a card that could legitimately see play. And once again, to touch on Silver Surfer First Steps, being at a 3/5 is really interesting because another thing to notice with the card is you want to be winning her lane, obviously. And so when you do things like the Silver Surfer First Steps, Shuri into Fallen One that Zenaid's been playing, that line in particular is getting an actually significant buff here because it's very, very important that you win Silver Surfer's lane in the decks that it's in. And so having the actual point to contribute heavily to the game plan there is definitely the point of power feels more impactful than a point of power usually does. And a point of power is already pretty impactful.
Yeah, just to touch up on Smlz brought up Silver Surfer First Steps. I think Silver Surfer First Steps has two main cards that it wants to work with, and one of those cards, Iron Patriot, already wants you to be winning the location, and so it just fits in so nicely as that 2-3 package right there. One thing I did want to bring up though is that I do like parts of these nerf because it doesn't make any of the cards feel like they're completely dead in the packages that they were dead in. Like Cannonball is still going to see play in those Mercury um, Spectrum decks, like the ongoing decks that won Golden Gauntlet qualifiers won. And then Juggernaut, I think, is still going to see a lot of play in Werewolf Merlin decks. They're able to fit in a Juggernaut at 4 cost and Cannonball at 5 cost in those Spectrum decks. And I think making them more niche in specific decks is a really good balance update to the game instead of them just being so generic that they're played in every single deck that's available. Some of the parts that we've skipped over, though, is Fantasticar getting nerfed by 2 whole points, paying for the sins of Invisible Woman First Steps. I was very surprised to see Fantasticar taking a whole 2 point nerf, and kind of surprised that they decided to go so aggressive on just one card instead of spreading out the -2 points beyond between two different cards. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I will be honest, I'm confused. This whole middle row here on the graphic, if you're listening via audio, it is Fantastic Nerf, Mad Thinker buff, and Nightmare buff. I definitely think those are the three least impactful changes, but I think that there's a few that are weird. Fantasticar losing 2 points of power instead of Invisible Woman First Steps losing even a single point of power is something very interesting. It seems like they really don't want to nerf Invisible Woman First Steps. I don't know why, but just I think this was the wrong card to hit. If you're gonna take a point off him, fine. I think taking a point off Fantasticar is like okay if end of turn is really prevalent in the meta, but I don't think taking 2 whole points off it is necessarily justified. I mean, this is a card that only fits in one archetype, and if it doesn't fit in the archetype anymore, then it's a dead card. So, not really thrilled about that one. One thing I will say is I think End of Turn might become the new Doom 2099 in the sense that, yeah, the first nerf was absolutely deserved. The card was overtuned, but then when you hit the second nerf, it's just like, why did we do that again? Like the deck wasn't really oppressive. I think that this might be the low elo menace in the sense that this is going to beat up on a lot of the lower ranked players. So we're talking a lot from the high infinite perspective. So we don't really see that much end of turn as compared to before the nerfs to Havoc and sort of the whole package there. Now I think we're gonna see even less of it. But if somebody down like pre-infinite or someone around rank 80, if they're still seeing a lot of it, it is still a very much viable nerf target. Mad Thinker, it's 1 point on a terrible card. I don't think it's gonna matter. And Nightmare is a bit weird. I really like Nightmare as a card. I think it's a really fun card, and I didn't think it was that terrible, but it did need a buff. Going with power instead of cost is interesting. I would have figured the route they would have gone with Nightmare would have make it like a 2-1 or a 2-2 instead of giving him positive power. Denish, what do you think about
Yeah, I
that?
actually kind of like the route they took with Nightmare here. So, what you're doing with Nightmare decks when you're not transforming with a spell, because obviously if you transform him with a spell, the buff does nothing. But also, he doesn't really feel bad when you're transforming him with a spell. The times he feels bad is when he gets stuck on the board. And so, making him have positive power makes him not an active detriment to any lane you put him in, which means you can put him in the third lane. Nightmare decks are really good at winning two lanes by a not way over the top margin, but a decent margin. But they're really bad. The big weakness is when you throw like 4 power in the empty lane, and then you go really tall in one of the Nightmare players' tall lanes. That's when the deck starts to struggle. And so now being able to throw Nightmare as an extra little point into that side lane can absolutely have an impact, I think, because you're not able to win the side lane with like just a even a Juggernaut on the last turn is like you'll have at least a couple more points over there that you wouldn't before. I think that's the biggest impact that this change has, so that you can have your Red Skull and your Ebony Maw in the two side lanes, and then not have to worry about that third lane dying to like I don't know Misty Knight on the last turn or something ridiculously small like that. But yeah, that's how I can see the Nightmare change having an impact on the deck. If anyone else wants to touch on Nightmare before we move on to I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into the Fenris and the Cannonball, but if we want to talk about the buffs before we switch over.
Yeah, I can touch a little bit on Nightmare. I think a 2 point buff is extremely significant for this card solely because, firstly, getting it out of the -1 range so it's not actively losing you a lane when you play him, but then also because they've recognized that they fell short on Nightmare, and that means they're actively looking at this card and making sure that it is at the play rate that they want it to be at. Which means that we could potentially see either more buffs in the future if it falls short, or they'll leave it the same as it is if it's performing correctly. I think Nightmare is an interesting card that they're. One thing I've noticed regarding a lot of their recent releases and OTA balance updates is that they keep releasing these extremely unique and fun new cards, and they're releasing them rather weak because they're scared if they release that they're going to release them too strong. Nightmare was a prime example of one of these alongside Infinity Ultron, Dormammu, Khonshu, cards like that where they have like a game warping effect and they're releasing them on the weaker side. But to go on to what Denish was saying regarding Fenris and Cannonball, we've been struggling as a game with this certain 2 card package, well, 3 card package, for what seems like a couple months now. And I'm excited to see how the meta will shape without having this as the main fallback. Because as we've seen through the course of the last couple months now, is that there will be a deck that comes out of the woodworks that is super strong, and then it gets cut off, and then everyone falls back to this Fenris Wolf Cannonball package. Don't you think? What are your thoughts on that, Denish?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's going to be a very significant meta shift, even in the sense that now that there's no Merc Ball, I think that there's a good chance we're going to see a lot of these bigger cards return, like maybe even a Thanos, or I don't know, Scar could come back. I want to know what Smz specifically, because I believe Smz was going on about big guy decks earlier in the voice call that we had. So I want to know, Smz, what decks do you think are gonna take over the meta here?
You're gonna love this answer. I think it's Hella. I think with the nerf to Fenris Wolf, nobody's really playing Stardust right now, and sort of the targeted destroy getting changed. The one thing that was very bad for Hella about Merc Ball is, say you got your infinite out on 5, that is all of a sudden a 40 power swing they are doing, and normally the infinite just wins you that lane. They are instead taking your infinite, saying, I don't think so, I'm gonna revive it here. Less Fenris is always good for Hella, and just being able to remove the targeted destroy of your biggest guy, or the guy you really need to win a lane, is just super impactful for the deck. I also think this might start to see the return of a bit of like a combo-esque meta game where you have these sort of important combo pieces. Maybe this is the meta game where like sort of like you see a lot of taller cards come back. Maybe decks focused around Infinity Ultron come back. I know I was testing an Infinity Ultron buff deck earlier. I definitely think that's one of the biggest winners this OTA. I think IU V-Hand was straight up outclassed last meta by Moongirl V-Hand. Maybe there'll be a lot of like pushing back now. Maybe IU Hand is overtaking the top spot. We will see. I definitely think Merc Ball leaving is a sizable gap in the meta. I think there will be some Merc Ball still played, but I think that it will be at a significantly less clip. I mean, probably at least 40% of my games were against either Wiccan or probably at least 70% of my games are against Wiccan or Mercury Ball, and it's just like the same stuff. Wiccan was good because it was one of the few decks that could sort of outpace Mercury Ball. Now that Mercury Ball is gone, I think that you can maybe see Wiccan take a little bit of a dip in popularity as well, because that deck was pretty well positioned into it, and also in some cases ran it. So I don't know. I think that this is going to be a sizable meta shift. I think big cards are going to come back. And I think we're going to start to see a lot more heavy synergy based decks. Maybe stuff like, okay, we're doing an all in surfer strategy instead of the tech. We're just going points, 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 points. Maybe we'll see Hella. Maybe we'll see Tribunal come back. Maybe we'll see some funky combo stuff like Kid Omega. Maybe Morgan Le Fay will be good with Airwalker now. Who knows?
I hope Morgan Le Fay is good. That deck's really fun. But yeah, I actually do agree. I think we'll see some of these bigger cards come back. Decks that want to run Infinite, decks that just want to go really tall and synergize. And one guy that tends to come back quite a bit when that happens is Shang-Chi. Shang-Chi has been kind of out of relevancy recently, especially with Merc Ball, because Cannonball is almost doing what Shang does, but better because it hits like an 8 power card, as well as also enabling the Fenris Wolf to pull it back, which is even more stats. I want to know what Roram thinks about Shang-Chi potentially having a little bit of a renaissance now that he doesn't have any competition in the destroying opponent's cards category.
Um, I think Shang-Chi actually is still going to be competing with Cannonball. I think I maybe I'm off basis here, but I still think Mercury Cannonball is one of the most efficient packages that you could be doing in the game. The the interaction hasn't died at all. And so I think Shang-Chi is still going to see competition in his role. However, I do think he'll start seeing more play when we start seeing more big point decks start to come out. Um, the problem right now is that big point decks have been kind of laying in waste because of how strong Mercury Seaball is. So I'd like to see how the metagame unfolds before I can say whether or not we're going to actually start seeing more Shang-Chi or not. I think Shang-Chi has been struggling because everyone's trying to keep below Shang-Chi rate so that the Fenris Wolf Seaball package isn't so strong when they blow up a certain target.
Absolutely. I do think that obviously if the meta does start to lean towards 9 power cards like this new White Tiger card or 8 power cards like mid-range gladiator stuff, then yeah, we could still not see Shang. But I'm very interested to see what happens there. Before we transition over to our next topic with Golden Gauntlet strategies, I'd like to have a little bit of a hella moment. It's almost a transition topic. I so in a conquest format, it's very important that the cards in your deck are um they're very good at getting information asymmetry because that's one of the easiest things to weaponize in conquest. And so I want to hear specifically, well, both of you, but Smlz, what do you think about Cosmic Ghost Rider in a Golden Gauntlet format in the Hella deck? Because the way that I see it is when you're running a card like a Cosmic Ghost Rider or even like Prodigy to some extent, these cards that care so much about things that the opponent can physically see on the board and or manipulate, I almost feel like it's going to be completely unusable once they know you have it. And so what do you think about Cosmic Ghost Rider in this kind of open list format?
Well, I think it largely depends on the meta. So Hela has a main problem, and that's not Stardust and Fenris Wolf, not direct counter. Its main problem is straight up decks that go taller. Nimrod is a very big problem for Hela, and to name one. And if you are expecting to see a lot of these decks that go taller than you, which are typically either heavy combo decks like Nimrod or ongoing shenanigans, Cosmic Ghost Rider flips those matchups for you. And that is a very important flipped matchup for you as well. I think it's the same thing with like every tech card. When they see the tech card in your deck, they know to play around it. I think just depending on what you see in the conquest, if you're expecting a lot of end of turn, a lot of ongoing, a lot of Nimrod, then maybe you can include it. But I definitely think it's worse in conquest than it
Well,
is on ladder.
here's the issue I have with that though, is every deck can very easily play around this in a way that you can't with other tech cards. So like Red Guardian is another card that I think might be a lot weaker in a conquest format, but that's a lot harder to play around. If you're playing against a bullseye deck, they can just play the bullseye in the back row and now you can't turn off the bullseye. If you're playing against a Nimrod deck, they can just play the Nimrod in the back row and now you can't turn off the Nimrod. These are things that are very realistic, like especially by turn 4. I feel like a lot of these cards will be possible to be in the back row, and now with Lady Deathstrike not hitting Fenris anymore, I'm just concerned that we're gonna have a really hard time being able to actually deal with the card when the opponent knows we have the Cosmic Ghost Rider. Miz, you want to hit it one more time before Roram talks about it?
Yeah, there's one more real point I want to like talk about with Cosmic Ghost Rider. It is not. I don't think it's as easy as you're making it to play around the card. Bullseye, you've never wanted to hit Bullseye in the deck. You've always wanted to hit the scalers, and it is extremely hard for them to fit their scalers in the back row. Bullseye is a deck that doesn't even fill up the board all too often. Hitting something like a Collector or a Morbius, at least Collector, it needs to be in the front row, and it's very hard to fit in like Morbius and Bullseye in the back row if you're doing Dawkins stuff, which is your high roll. So I think it's very effective against Bullseye. I also think that Cosmic Ghost Rider against Nimrod, you're not even really trying to hit the Nimrod. You're trying to hit the Kid Omega. So I think it's very interesting dynamics. I'm excited to see how it goes in Golden Gauntlet with the Cosmic Ghost Rider decks. I'm very interested to see how that card performs. But on to Roram. What are your thoughts on
I
this?
think Cosmic Ghost Rider is just a meta call out card. I've been playing him a lot in Airshim, and I actually think Cosmic Ghost Rider has a lot of potential depending on what meta cards we see coming out. So currently, what I think is going to be kind of best case going into Golden Gauntlet qualifiers 2 is I think we're going to start seeing a lot of Scream and Batroc moving decks. And I think Cosmic Ghost Rider is extremely well positioned against that specific deck. But then we're also going to see a lot of Cerebro. And Cosmic Ghost Rider is not that good into Cerebro. Any form of Cerebro, Cosmic Ghost Rider is not going to be that useful. And so it's just more of a meta call out rather than a is this card good or not. I think Cosmic Ghost Rider is extremely good into specific decks and extremely bad into other ones. And that's how all tech cards should be. I just think that if you're playing Hela, which is what we were talking about, if you're playing Hela and you're seeing a lot of Scream, a Cosmic Ghost Rider on 4 after your Corvus is just devastating for their game plan versus maybe a Legion on 4. But if you're playing in Cerebro, a Legion's going to probably do much better. You can cheat out some kind of bad locate. You can fixate how you can change up how they're going to have to play their game with a Legion versus a Cosmic Ghost Rider. And so again, like I said, it's just a call out depending on what's good or not. I think for oh my goodness, Golden Gauntlet qualifiers 2, it's kind of a mouthful. Scream Batroc move decks, I think, are going to be plentiful. And I think those are going to be what we're seeing a lot of in ladder in the next coming days as the meta starts getting figured out.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. All right. All right. So we heard all about the current OTA and sort of what they did change. What is one change, particularly buffs, because I think they hit all the nerfs that we wanted to nerf. What is really one buff that you kind of wish made it into the OTA? Something small, like a +1 point, or maybe a little change in functionality. We're gonna start with Roram here. What's one small buff you wish made it in?
One small buff I wish that made it in. There's so many to choose from. I think one of the ones that I would like the most, though, is just a small functionality change in Dormammu, is specifically his third spell. Currently, it destroys randomly. So, like, you'll play the spell and then we'll choose at random which one it will destroy. I think if it just changed it where it destroyed kind of like how Carnage or Venom does, where it does the front row first and then the back row. That way, you could be able to play around and more appropriately, you know, you can kind of play around that third spell and you'll know exactly what you're destroying every single time. And I think that would make Dormammu a lot better.
Yeah, I do think that is a really graceful Dormammu change that they could make. I haven't really thought about buffs recently because of the Agatha thing. It just feels like all the decks that I play don't really need them. But in general, I think Moon Knight could use some help. I know he's seeing play in the Goon Knight deck. I know he's seeing play in the like the there's yeah, Black Bolt things, aggro discard, all those. But I really think even though I don't believe most people will enjoy playing against Moon Knight. I think Moon Knight is a card that could use a little bit more help than it currently has.
Yeah, so I've been playing a lot of Pixie lately, and there's two main decks that I've been playing. There is a Patriot list, and there is a Gore Iron Man list. And I think that Patriot could use a little bit of help, but I think that Patriot's a pretty big change. But I also really like big ongoing strategies. So the change that I am proposing would be to take Onslaught to a 6 9. I think giving him that extra point of power is definitely something that's very cool, and I really like these like big ongoing strategies being promoted because they're sort of all in or nothing. I do like that, like super interactable, all in or nothing big combo. I think that's the way combo really should be played in this game. So I definitely think Onslaught 6-9 is the change that I'd want. Going on to our second topic today, it is Golden Gauntlet. So when this episode releases, Golden Gauntlet 2 Golden Gauntlet World Championship qualifier number 2, it's a mouthful, will be up for signups. It is going on Saturday. It is going on the first Saturday of August or first Saturday of September, and it will start at 1 p.m. Eastern, probably run till about 10-11 p.m. Eastern as a finish. We have the Golden Gauntlet 2 champion, Roram, playing Cringe Incarnate in 34 card Monty. So, Roram, take us through your best tips for Golden Gauntlet, how you spot a good meta call, and how you think people will have to perform if they want to qualify for World Championships.
Yeah, so sometimes I was lucky to be able to participate in all 3 Golden Gauntlets. And some tips that I've probably learned the best is information asymmetry is extremely valuable in open deck list competitions like Golden Gauntlet. In my first Golden Gauntlet, I was running Agamotto only, like the old Season Passler deck. And it did extremely well for me, but it lacked certain cards that gave me edge, where my opponents didn't know. They could always play around exactly what I could do. They could calculate out my exact power total. And then for Golden Gauntlet Qualifier 1, I decided to bring the most meta deck, which was the Lady Death Strike Merc Ball deck. And that one, I learned that everyone was playing around it, making sure that they had ways to beat it. And I didn't have any of those information asymmetry cards. So what are the cards that I'm talking about when I'm saying information asymmetry? I'm talking about cards that either randomly generate an ability or they will steal an ability from your opponent. Cards like Iron Patriot, Valentina, Copycat, Hulkling, Erisham. Cards like that can give you just a small edge on your opponent if they don't know what you have. Since this is a conquest format and you start off knowing exactly what they have, any bit of information that your opponent doesn't know about is crucial. For my Golden Gauntlet Qualifiers 1, I lost because of a randomly generated Heimdall that I didn't play around. I lost 8 cubes and lost the game because of that, and I thought I had it in the bag. Another key point is to test your deck. Play it often. We're lucky enough that in our community for our alliance that we're all in, the Pixel Alliance, we have the opportunity to test and scrimmage our decks that we want to bring and really get it through and test it out, because testing it out on ladder is good, but then testing it in Conquest, so you're in a Conquest format, so you want to test it in Conquest, but the matchmaking in Conquest is so terrible, while the matchmaking in ladder is more favorable, but it isn't that Conquest format. So finding some kind of balance where you can scrimmage with your buddies and your friends is really important to figure out your deck and its quirks and its kinks. Another thing that's also important is study the top 5 decks that are currently in the format. A majority of your competition will be bringing those decks. And so understanding your play lines about that and how to go far with that. That doesn't mean that they're going to be in the top 16. It just means that you're probably going to see them in your I believe the term is round robins, like where you're facing a bunch of people trying to make sure that you qualify for the top 16. That's where you're going to see a lot of those kind of meta copycat decks. And so you want to make sure that you have all those things planned out and know what you're going to be doing going forward. As for deck choices, I think choosing something that is strong but not the best deck is the best case scenario. For me, when I chose 34 card Monty, I had been practicing that deck for 3 weeks before I brought it to Golden Gauntlets 2. It was a strong deck that wasn't considered meta at the moment, and because it wasn't considered meta, no one brought my relevant tech cards like Cassandra Nova or Darkhawk or Gorgon to the matchups at all, which allowed me to kind of get a lot of easy wins against the meta decks that I had been practicing against. So those, I think, covers all the main tips that I have when you're going into Golden Gauntlets and what I've learned in my multiple times playing this format of tournaments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for Golden Gauntlet specifically, your advice is much better than mine. I've done decently, obviously on Hella both times that I've participated, but I'm losing to skill issues still, not necessarily randomly generated Heimdalls yet. But yeah, definitely know your deck. I want to touch a little bit on conquest strategy as opposed to open deck list Golden Gauntlet strategy, because I do think I have a decent grasp on what you want to do in conquest. One thing to think about in conquest is getting an early lead. Getting an early lead in conquest is really significant, more so than you would at first think, because if you have, let's say, 8 cubes to the opponent's 4, that gives you flexibility to stay on a 50-50 where your opponent is basically lifelined in on that 50-50 now. And so you get some extra leadway. And so what you're able to do is, let's say you force two 50-50s, but if you have 8 cubes and they have 4, you are officially 75% favored in the match, because if you manage to force two 50-50s and 2 games for 4 cubes, you only need to win one of them. Your opponent needs to win both. And so it's a lot easier for you to force these chokehold positions if you value your early cubes a little bit more, like, and spend them more sparingly. Um Obviously 10 to 9 isn't the biggest deal. It's once you start getting these more substantial leads. And so you almost need to be very careful. Obviously, you can't be reckless, but you also need to keep in mind that at a certain point, it almost becomes unrealistic for you to run it back. Obviously, you could run it back at any point, but what I mean by that is, let's say you have 7 cubes, they have, or you have 3 cubes, they have 7, and you're going into a situation where you're like 35% to win. Obviously, with a lot of decks, it's hard to get these exact numbers, but what I mean is it's close, but you're not favored. If you leave for 2 cubes, you're probably not going to run it back, right? You're not going to be able to win. How many is that? That's 4 games in a row or 5 games in a row. If you keep getting put in these positions, you almost at some point need to just go for it. Obviously, don't be reckless with it. Don't just stay on like a 40% because you're gambling. If you're favored in the matchup, you shouldn't be like making decisions that are just bad. But I do think it is something to think about conquest strategy wise. Roram, you want to hop in?
Yeah, actually, Dennis, you bring up a great point. So it is a conquest format. And Dennis brought up some really wonderful points regarding conquest strategy. Some other things I want to point out with conquest is that your first 2 games, one thing I find with a lot of conquest games, and it's different than Golden Gauntlet, is that people will snap early and aggressively when you're playing conquest as a game mode, and that's not correct when you're doing Golden Gauntlet. your first two rounds should be like a feeling, kind of like when you're watching soccer or playing soccer, and the first like 5-10 minutes of the game is kind of figuring out what your opponent's defense is like, what kind of play strategy they have. That's what you're doing for your first two rounds in the Golden Gauntlet format, where you're not really snapping very aggressively. You're snapping on like, I'm 80-90% sure I'm going to win, and then you punish them if they stay on it. And you're trying to bait out early cube wins for the first couple rounds so that you can achieve that advantage early on. And don't be afraid to retreat for one. If you're not retreating for one, at least once or twice in your conquest, you're messing up. Denish, you want to hop in?
Yeah, I'll hop in real quick. I do want to touch on the snapping element of Conquest a little bit as well. I do think it's important to note that snapping on Conquest and Ladder are not the same thing. Obviously, you don't, well, not obviously, but as you said, you don't want to be snapping really aggressively in those first couple of games. But one thing to think about is you want to make sure your opponent knows why you're snapping. If it is some form of Mirage Snap, and by Mirage Snap, I don't mean the card, I mean like almost a bluff. Not quite a bluff, but more so like, okay, I'm going to use Hela again as an example. I have Red Shift in hand. On ladder, I would snap before the red shift. In Conquest, I would snap after. And the reason I want to snap after is because if I can get him to leave for one cube, that's incredible. And I'm pretty sure I'm favored there because, I mean, red shift on Agatha, I feel like I win 99% of my games. But yeah, it's very, very different in Conquest than ladder snapping. Another example would be playing well down. You need to actually, I'll let Roram touch on it because I'm honestly not quite sure. Roram, how do you think people should snap while down in Conquest? I don't play as much Conquest.
Like when you're down in cubes, like if you have 3 or 4 and they have like 7 or 8, is that what you're meaning?
Yes.
Okay. So when you're down on cubes and you need to kind of win back, you actually start to get a little bit more aggressive with your snaps because you have to kind of claw back your way into the match in a sense. And so if we're using Denish's example with the redshift Agatha, at the beginning you're kind of redshifting and then you're snapping afterwards. When you're down on cubes, you're snapping beforehand, kind of like on ladder, but you're making sure you're doing it like pretty much almost immediately. Like right after turn two, right after turn one, you snap it. And the reason why you do that is because they're gonna think in their head that you just top deck redshift and I should probably leave here. There's a timing when you do it with snaps. Sometimes people like to wait the whole timer and then snap. That is appropriate sometimes. That's more when you have like equal amount of cubes, but when you're down, you want to snap like super aggressively at the beginning of your turn so that you can chip away some of those cubes rather early because psychologically your opponent will see that you're snapping extremely fast and they're going to think, okay, he just drew the card that he needed. I should leave here and not let him take more cubes out of me. And so they'll leave and they'll respect your snap a lot more. One thing though that you should be doing if you're in the dominant position, so let's say you're the one that has 6-7 cubes and your opponent has 3, you should be snapping on turn 1. And the reason why I'm saying that is because your opponent has to win 3 games in order to beat you. And you're trying to get them down into 1 game territory. And so it's a strategy where you're snapping as soon as you can, even with or without any sort of knowledge, so that way you can knock it down to a 1 game. You want to finish out the game right then. It's a little trick in Conquest where When you're in a dominant position, you snap before like even kind of like seeing your cards when you're that far ahead, and it's just to kind of punish your opponent further into losing the game as quickly as possible. And it also gets them flustered. They make wrong plays. They're not all in their head at the right times. And that is a cool little conquest strategy that you can take advantage of. And the last one I could probably talk about when it comes to snapping, uh, if you guys are dead even, and it's like you guys have like both 4 cubes or both 6 cubes, you honestly shouldn't ever be snapping until after turn 3 and you see all the locations. You're not in a position to, like, when you're at that like neck and neck part of the conquest game, you're not really, neither of you are really in a position to lose quick cubes by a location. And so it kind of just follows down to where you're conservative with snapping at the beginning of the game, you're moderate to normal with your snapping in the middle of the conquest game, and then you're more aggressive towards the end with your snapping. Um, and that's kind of a good way to follow the snapping methodology, where you can gamble your wins a lot stronger when you're up ahead. Denish or Smlz, do either of you want to comment on this?
I'll hop in again because it looks like Smlz might be having a little bit of Wi-Fi issues. Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's obviously very interesting to hear you talk about snapping in particular, in the form of conquest. Once again, I don't play the game mode too frequently, so most of the things I'm saying are conceptual, and you can tell me I'm an idiot and I'm wrong if they're not true. But another thing would be retreating. So I almost feel like retreating is only correct in when you're up. I almost feel like you don't want to retreat when down if the odds are close. Obviously, there's games where you kind of have to retreat. Sometimes you get screwed by a location. Sometimes you get like, oh wow, they high rolled really hard and I didn't draw my tech. But it feels like in general, retreating seems to yield negative results for me specifically at least. Ron, what do you think about retreating?
Yeah, retreating should be used as a tool, like always. It's better when you have more cubes because you can retreat more times. Now, sometimes, so one time in my game, I was up. I was up. I had 10 cubes. He had 4, and I could finish out the game. And he snapped on me to make it a 4 cube game on turn 6. He boomer snapped me, and I retreated. I actually thought long and hard about it, and it might have been the incorrect move, but there was always a chance that I could have lost it and lost momentum. And I thought that was not the best move to take. Now, when you're down, you have to play the odds. You have to, honestly, if you have a 50-50 chance and you're down, you're taking those odds pretty much every time. It sucks because you hate having to rely on RNG for your wins. You'd rather have a more secure win, but when it's a 50-50, you stay. Um, though, you should still retreat games that you have less than a third chance to win. Even if you're at 2 and 3, like if you have 3 cubes and you could lose 2, if you have less than a third chance to win, so let's say it's a gambit, you have a gambit in your hand and you have a 25% chance to hit the right card that would win the game for you, you should leave those games. Now, it's not fun. Like on ladder or in conquest, you're going to stay in those games because it's a 25% chance. Like, who cares? It's just ladder. But in Golden Gauntlet, you have to leave those because the odds are so not in your favor that you should always leave those. I had a chance like that for basically for the win in my Golden Gauntlet 2, where I had a Gambit in my hand. But he had 5 cards on his field, and I had a Wolverine in my hand. So I only needed to kill one of 4 cards. So I had a 4 and 5 chance for Gambit to win, just right out. Just kill any of those 4, and I won. And then I had a 1 in 3 chance in my hand to discard the Wolverine, and then another 1 in 3 chance for the Wolverine to go to the right location. Of course, my odds were crazy. I hit the 1 in 5 that didn't win me the game with Gambit. But then I hit the Wolverine in my hand, and the Wolverine went to the exact location that I needed it to for the win. And those are odds are like they're crazy, but you always stay on that because you have a 80% chance to win right away. And those are just some of the risks that you're going to have to take. You kind of have to figure out those odds for your deck, and once you've practiced your deck enough, you'll know what those odds are and how often you should take them and what you should do in those situations. Most of the time, people aren't playing with RNG cards. I think RNG cards are really important to the game and to these kind of game modes. They're another element of unknown information. And I think the unknown part of the information, again, information asymmetry is the most crucial part about Golden Gauntlets. You can see it with Butt. Butt will run Hulkling in all of his decks because not knowing what that Hulkling is causes your opponent to play around things that might not even exist. And you want your opponent to play around things that don't exist because it causes them to make unoptimal plays. But that's pretty much all I have to say regarding Golden Gauntlet and how to prep and play appropriately from my perspective and my experiences. And I'll give the time over to Denish.
Absolutely. I do think one thing you touched on a little bit at the end, as well as the start, was the deck building element of it. I think bringing a meta deck is almost always wrong. And one thing we've always pushed on the podcast, Zenate and I, and also Smlz, has been to build your own decks. And I think for Golden Gauntlet specifically, that is almost most prevalent. I think if you bring meta deck, you have almost no chance. I think making changes to the deck to include, like, I don't know, a Hulkling over a Giganto or something that people just aren't ready for is going to increase your odds of doing well drastically because you're going to be able to catch people off guard and put them in situations that are uncomfortable for sure. Um, Last comments before we end the episode. Roram, do you have anything else you want to say just in general? It doesn't have to be about Golden Gauntlet.
No, I think I'm good.
All right, sweet. Where can people find you? Where do you stream?
They can find me at twitch.tv/Roramplays. I stream not as often as I'd like to, but I do try and stream as much as I can. Um, you can find me more often on Saturdays or Sundays, as those are the days that I can stream more often.
Sweet. And what's your Twitch link one more time?
Twitch.tv/Roramplays.
Perfect. And you can find me at twitch.tv/Denish_Hella. I play Hella almost exclusively. Another place you can find me, I like to hang out in the official Marvel Snap and Roram Plays, official Roram Plays Discord servers and the voice channels. Come in and say hi. It's a lot of fun in there. And Smlz, where can they find you?
All right, so apologize on my behalf. I am having some serious internet troubles right now. I'm on a phone hotspot, and that's the only thing that's working. You can find me at twitch.tv/smlzttv and youtube.com/@snapacademyyt. Apologies for no internet, for some internet issues on my end on the second topic. I still hope that the podcast was enjoyable for all of you. And that's going to be it for us. So have a great day, everybody. And we appreciate you listening. And make sure to sign up for the Golden Gauntlet qualifiers. The link will be in the Marvel Snap main Discord. You can also find it in the Roram Plays Discord. We're going to have it there. And have a great day, everyone.